to learn how to, well, together with the children, me and Julie are trying to teach the kids how to interrupt adult conversation, or how to take their turns when it comes to having conversation. Sometimes it feels a little bit like this commercial for this movie that I remember. Just like, so can we show that video?
Cannot do that. Sean! See how annoying that is.
I'd get convicted when I saw this. We'll be in the car and the same situation happens. The kids are in the back and maybe they're making a noise, or maybe they're just trying to get our attention. Mom, 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 dad, dad, dad. And boy, I felt like this woman before. In fact, I think I've even done it. Ethan, Ethan, Ethan! Don't you see how annoying that is? Well, in our scriptures this day, and if you'd like to follow along, the fill in the blanks are on the yellow sheet here. In our scriptures this day, Luke is writing to us, and he's reminding us what Jesus says about being in prayer, and the need to be constantly in prayer and persistently in prayer. And as Jesus is offering this story, this parable, if you will, of the unjust judge. Boy, that's really hard to say. Good job of getting through that. The unjust judge. As Jesus is offering this parable of the unjust judge, we're supposed to learn a little bit about what it means to be in prayer consistently, what it means to be in prayer persistently, what it means to be engaged in prayer without ceasing. And so Jesus tells us this story to try to help us get our heads around it. And then so we just heard the story, and there's this judge, and there's this widow. Now, I just want to say, just to sort of place things under context, widows were not as revered as they are these days in the first century Mediterranean world or Jesus world. Widows were sort of pushed to the side and oftentimes marginalized, and oftentimes, just swindled out of what was coming to them when their husbands passed away. And one of the primary missions of the church that would emerge out of the Jesus movement would be to look out for these widows, would be to look out for the orphans. They were what we identify as marginalized people these days. And so the widow, when he lifts this story about this widow, he's thinking about the least of these among them, those people who just seem to have a lot of bad luck. Not only does their husband die, but they have been jilted out of their inheritance. Not only have they been jilted out of their inheritance, but people don't give them the time of day. And so the widow was going to see this judge, and she was asking what was rightfully hers. And she was persistently pestering that judge. And we hear, let's have that first fill in the blank. We hear the judge sort of thinking to himself, I am going to grant justice to this woman. Not because she's owed justice, not because it's necessarily the right thing to do, but I'm going to do this so that she may not wear me out. Boy, I got to tell you, I have felt this way with the kids bugging me. Boy, may I have a piece of chocolate? May I have a piece of chocolate? May I have a piece of chocolate? Here's a piece of chocolate! Shut up! This is where the unjust judge is, right? But we all know that piece of chocolate is not the right thing to do. It's not the proper way of showing love for the child. There needs to be some boundaries. There needs to be, I need to be consistent in the way that I offer love for my children, and not just give up for everything they pester me about. And so it's interesting that as Jesus is offering this parable of the unjust judge, we're automatically thinking, okay, this is an easy one to figure out, right? I mean, Jesus is telling us something about prayer. We should be more like, in prayer, we should be more like this woman who is persistent, always bugging. More like the kid who is always bugging dad for a piece of candy. More like Sean, who is always bugging mom to take a look at the things around her. Mom, 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 mom! That's how we should be about our prayer, right? Well, maybe not. Because Jesus goes on to say this. Yeah, okay, there's that unjust judge, and you guys get the point, right? I've told you about this story, and, there's God and there's this unjust judge, and so let me just talk about how this unjust judge is like God and how he is not like God. Okay, true. It's true that people, you need to be persistently in prayer, like this widow. Yes, you need to be consistent. And even when you're not getting what you expect to come to you, you need to be faithful in your prayers. However, God hears your prayers like this judge does. But it's not a matter of wearing God down, like it is with the judge. See, the key point for that fill in the blank here is this. He responds and he offers justice, the unjust judge offers justice because he doesn't want to be worn out. He offers a piece of candy to his kids because I'm sick of having to pull on my sleeve. But that is not how God responds to our persistence in prayer. That is not how God responds to us. How does God respond to us? Let's add that next fill in the blank. Jesus says, even if this unjust judge is going to respond to her because he doesn't want to be worn out, but God, who loves you, who is faithful and just, will respond quickly. God will quickly grant justice. He doesn't have to think about how the people are going to wear him out. He's going to just quickly respond to your prayers and grant justice when you pray. And so we find that there is a significant difference in this parable. I mean, the parables only go so far. They cannot be applied, literally to God. Because, well, God is so much bigger than all the stories that we could tell one another. So, the parable can only partially be applied to God, and so we only get a glimpse of what God is like. And clearly he's not like the unjust judge. He's so much more than the unjust judge. He's so much more ready to offer us mercy and justice in our lives if we would just pray for it. Now, it's interesting. I had this visit with Rod this week, or last couple weeks ago yet, and I was, we were talking about something, and then he goes, and I hear a butt coming. And everything before the butt, is nothing. It is BS, he said. And everything after the butt is the more important thing. Well, we don't have a but in this one, Ryan, but we have a yet in this one. And so it goes like this. And, let's have that next fill in the blank. And yet, and I know English teachers correct me if I'm wrong, but we treat yet pretty much the same way as but there as a conjunction. Yeah, okay. And yet, when Jesus comes, will he find faith on earth? Now, this is not a direct quote, it's a paraphrase from it. And yet, when the Son of Man comes, will he find faith on earth? Now, here's where the rubber hits the road. Here's where we have this parabolic flip-flop. Now, every time Jesus tells a parable, it's giving us a glimpse of God's kingdom. But more frequently than not, when Jesus tells a parable, we think we understand the story. We think it sounds like a familiar story, but it ends up taking this sort of flip-flop, and we hear it in a whole new way. Remember that story of the Good Samaritan, for example? I think we talked about it last week even when we were talking about Samaritans. The story of the Good Samaritan. And he told that story why? Does anybody recall why he started telling that story? Remember the question that inspired him to tell that story? Who is my neighbor? Thank you. Good job. Who is my neighbor? The lawyer says, well, I know you want me to love my neighbor as myself, but who is my neighbor? And he starts telling the story of the Good Samaritan. And we're trying to, at the end of that story, he says, who is the neighbor? Who was the neighbor in that story? What was the answer? What did the lawyer come up with? I guess the one who showed kindness. Isn't that interesting how it flip-flops? We get thinking that the neighbor is the one we need to help. But at the end of Jesus' story, the story has flip-flopped. This parabolic story has flip-flopped. And when he asks, who is the neighbor? It's the one who offers help. So now we're stuck with another parable. And the parable is supposed to tell us something about how we ought to pray. Something about our relationship with God the Father. And so now when we're starting to think, and we're thinking, hey, well, okay, this is easy, right? We understand the story, the parable. We're supposed to be the widow, and God is supposed to be the unjust judge, and everything's going great, and we're at the beginning of this parable, and now we're near the end, and yet, here's where the rubber hits the road, and yet, when the Son of Man comes, when Jesus comes, will he find faith on earth? Okay, so now we have to do a little Chewian examination of this scripture. Let's flip-flop it a little. Maybe, just maybe, the widow is God. And maybe, just maybe, the unjust judge, the way we operate is us, and the way we operate in the world. Maybe, just maybe. Maybe, just maybe, when it comes to prayer, God is always ready to engage us like this widow. God is persistently faithful in engaging us like this widow. And maybe, just maybe, we're more like the unjust judge and respond to God. Oh, will you stop wearing me out? Okay, already, I'll listen to you. Sound familiar? Seems I remember somebody got swallowed with a whale for that. Right? Maybe our prayers, maybe when this familiar story plays out, it's more flip-flop in our lives. God, who is faithful and just, is always ready to hear the prayers that we offer. He's always ready to respond to the prayers that we offer. He's persistently trying to engage us to have a relationship with Him. And yet, we just are the ones who seem to be getting worn down. And yet when we respond, we realize that that's what we were created to be in relation. That's who we were created to be in relationship with in the beginning. And everything starts to click into place. Your challenge this week, if you choose to accept it, I invite you to read 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, 12 through 22. And in there you're going to find in verse 17, one of the invitations of Paul to all Christians is to pray without ceasing. But surrounding that, chapter 5, verse 17, surrounding that pray without ceasing is a whole bunch of other things about acting justly, treating others kindly. You get the idea. I invite you to read and pray on that and think about how you can respond to God's persistent invitation to have a relationship with Him, with a relationship with others, loving God and loving your neighbor. Take time to listen intentionally. Oh, I'm going to have to do that with my children this week. Engage in an act of justice or mercy without delay.